All right, kids, has anyone ever told you that there's a song they heard which reminds them of you? Or suggested a TV show for you to watch because they think you would really like it? Or sandwiches. Everybody knows my favorite food is sandwiches. People tell me about restaurants, and from time to time after I've tried them, I'm like, why? You heard this or saw this or had this and it made you think of me? Why would you think I would like it? Or, even worse, you did actually like it. And so does somebody you're not a fan of, and now y'all have the same taste and stuff. Well, that's where I am today.
I'm never voting Democrat till y'all actually do something that changes something. Now, when we come together and vote as a block, like Dr. Claud Anderson said, the Democrats, they're going to be forced to do it. They ain't going to just give it to us. China ain't going to just give it to us. They're going to hand it to us. They'll just show you somebody that look like us and get 94% of the black vote, and we just give it to them. We're just so happy just to see somebody that we think is us.
Dr. Claud Anderson, whom some of you recommended and whose ideas are endorsed by Kanye West. Now, Dr. Claud Anderson has held the highest positions in federal and state government and politics. He was state coordinator of education for Florida under Governor Ruben Askew during the tumultuous period of the 1970s. After successful social reform projects in Florida and leading President Jimmy Carter's Florida campaign to a win in the state, Carter appointed Anderson as the federal co-chairman for a commission of governors in the Southeast states. According to Anderson himself, by the way, although he has been a political independent for many years, he was a major planner and coordinator for the 1988 Democratic Convention in Atlanta and has taught at all levels of education. Dr. Anderson is also president of the Harvest Institute, a nationally recognized think tank that does research, policy development, education, and advocacy to increase the self-sufficiency of Black America. And Dr. Claud Anderson wants to achieve Black self-sufficiency through what he refers to as Powernomics, which is the name of a company that he is president of, Powernomics Corporation of America, that publishes his books and produces multimedia presentations in which he explains his concept, Powernomics. Quote, "This concept and plan teaches Blacks how to pool resources and aspects of power so they can produce, distribute, and consume in a way that creates goods and wealth." So, as I alluded to earlier, in August of 2020, Ye tweeted that both Democratic presidential nominee at the time, Joe Biden, and Republican President Donald Trump should talk with Dr. Claud Anderson as soon as possible about restoring the Black community. That per Newsweek. And if you're like me, you're gonna make yourself a sandwich after you're done recording, and you're questioning what Republicans did that would make Ye believe they have earned his vote. I don't know either. Then again, this is a man who says a MAGA hat makes him feel like Superman, and may not be aware that his visit to the White House in 2018 reportedly left Trump speechless and confused, and White House aides embarrassed. Anyways, it was Yeezy caping for a political party whose national committee confused these Black staffers for one another, I wonder why, then shouting out Dr. Anderson that almost kept me from looking into his works. And then I saw this.
I trust Ice Cube, he's got money. I can ask Ice Cube for something. I'm 9 times out of 10. I'm convinced he will provide me with it. Kanye West promised me stuff. He hadn't delivered on anything yet. But,
Kanye West.
But see, my trust level there is real low, but with Ice Cube, it's real high.
The grand old party probably confuses Ice Cube and Ye for one another. No matter. Dr. Claud Anderson was first brought to my attention in the comment section of my video about Dr. Thomas Sowell from around a year ago. And while I maintain that Sowell speaks for conservatism and libertarians, being the only Black man that European Americans listen to, Anderson speaks to blickety Black Americans with a capital B. As you're about to see and or hear, this video won't be a one-to-one comparison, point by point, between these two men. I want to give you an alternative. Dr. Anderson doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. Both Sowell and Anderson are authors, intellectuals, and speakers who are sought out for their opinion and expertise. Both are still getting it in at an age where the gray in their hair serves as a crown of wisdom. But only Dr. Anderson can give you this kind of analysis.
We don't have any problem with discrimination. That is not racism. Racism is a complex, competitive issue strictly between whites and Blacks. It doesn't include anybody else. And I'm sick and tired. That's why I'm pissed to the highest level of pissivity.
With that said, and comments like Dr. Claud Anderson is how one combats Thomas Sowell in my inbox, is Claud Anderson the anti-Thomas Sowell? To kind of try to answer that question maybe, what we ain't gonna do is talk about the transatlantic slave trade, a topic that Dr. Anderson covers frequently. I do too, especially in the video I made about Dr. Thomas Sowell. We're going to focus on integration and immigration. So let's start with this clip from 1995.
What I've concluded from analysis is that there are going to be a converging of social factors nationally and internationally that's going to place blacks in a permanent status of underclassship. And one, we anticipate by that point in time, based on all the research that's coming to us, that the next generation of whites are going to be more anti-black than they've been since the civil rights movement.
Many of Dr. Claud Anderson's supporters see this clip as him correctly predicting the rise of MAGA, along with open, overt white nationalism that came about with the election of one former, maybe future president, Donald J. Trump. It's a great example of why so many black people listen to Anderson. And yes, the second most prevalent race or ethnicity in the US and much of America, by county also, is no longer black people. In addition to anti-blackness and increased population of Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans, meaning black folks won't be the majority minorities anymore, Dr. Anderson will go on to talk about how in order to avoid being a permanent underclass in this society, we, black people, needs to be more aggressive and competitive against immigrant groups in order to get to white society. That doesn't mean he wants black people to be a part of white society.
And so in Winston-Salem, we had our own buses. And so when that movement was successful in Alabama, came up to Winston-Salem, and blacks in Winston-Salem says, we want to ride on front of some white buses. So we said, we don't have any white buses. They said, well, we'll get some so we can ride on in front of them.
I feel like a complete asshole because I never thought about that. Like that whole time they did the boycott, they should have been trying to establish their own bus company as opposed to wanting to ride. I never thought about that. Y'all boycotted for a year just to want to ride on the front?
See, you're a smart man.
I never thought about that.
I never thought of that either. Good point. Why didn't black people at that time create and maintain their own forms of transportation? If you keep score at home, I, somehow, some way, am here with Charlemagne, Kanye, and Ice Cube.
I don't know how the hell we got here. We ain't never been here before.
Earlier in this interview with The Breakfast Club, Dr. Anderson brought up the Safe Bus, North Carolina's first African-American owned transportation company, which was formed in the mid-1920s to service the East Winston community, and it continued operating until 1972 when it became part of the Winston-Salem Transit Authority. Shortly after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which he isn't the biggest fan of. Seems like every other black community in America needed assistance with transportation. Regardless, Dr. Anderson has a problem with integration. Any society where the majority will win and rule and the minority will lose and suffer, why would anybody want to integrate? Integration is making black folks a guest. It means I will make you a guest in something that is owned and controlled by other people. Black folks can never acquire wealth and power as long as they're integrated. That's why Dr. Anderson stresses community among black Americans, which is something that is clearly lacking today, but didn't seem to be before the thick of the civil rights movement. Shout out to Bronzeville here in Columbus. In one of his 4 books, Black Labor, White Wealth, he talks about how black America has failed in selecting black leadership that will help advance us. And he cautions how it could be dangerous to give voice to unorganized, inarticulate groups. Dr. Anderson also talks about unjust distribution of wealth, power, and resources, and explains how European Americans have simultaneously gave themselves boots with straps while making it difficult for black Americans to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, or just firebombing black towns and neighborhoods, or lynching in order to take said boots away and then asking why we don't have boots. This cruel jest is something articulated by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Furthermore, Dr. Anderson describes what he calls the doctrine of unequal exchange, a concept that explains why Africans traded prisoners of war from other tribes, kingdoms, and nations for guns and other stuff that really doesn't amount to social capital and necessary gains. Oh, and pre-colonial Africans didn't hold each other in bondage due to skin color, you racist. No need to go into detail about that here. Just know that the doctrine of unequal exchange extends to black buying power. You know, the $1.4 or $1.7 trillion, depending on the source, of black buying power that we collectively have as black Americans, so to speak, so we're told, that we've squandered because we'd rather not use that money to buy boots or the optional straps. Instead, we buy Hublots and Audemars Piguet and whatever else I've heard Jay-Z talking about, but can't even picture on my own wrist. This is a myth that I have debunked in a previous video where I received another comment about Claud Anderson. And I cover how impoverished black people's spending habits are no different than lower income working class people of any race or ethnicity. Buying luxury goods that one may not be able to afford is called status signaling, looking or behaving in desirable ways. Poor people don't want to look poor. And if a 22-year-old black college student were to buy 4 pair of shoes one year and spend $150 per on them, we shouldn't pretend like using half of that money and investing it in the stock market or something is a realistic, viable option. The potential to not get a return on that investment is devastating. I mean, I wish young black adults could reach upward mobility through starting a business. But this is the black people version of boomers telling millennials that we could buy a house if it wasn't for avocado toast and Starbucks. Just denying people simple daily joy. That is, even if they like these things, I didn't. I've never had coffee a day in my life, but I was that kid buying shoes. Very Dr. Thomas Sowell of anyone thinking this way. This black buying power thing could be one of few things that Sowell and Anderson agree on, putting financial nonsense on behavior. So I disagree with both of them. Another author recommended to me in the comment section of that video was Dr. Jared A. Ball, who wrote The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. There he said, consumerism, spending habits, good or bad, do not determine collective wealth or an economic strength. No community becomes rich, nor can one become poor as a result of their spending. Black people are not poor for having missed out on previous opportunities or by choosing today out of some form of cultural deformity or intricate financial illiteracy to, as Jay-Z suggests, foolishly give away potential communal wealth by shopping. Jay-Z, like most commercial artists and art, reflects a racial and class politics often masked by talent and performance. Dr. Ball is referring to Jay-Z's song, The Story of OJ, where Sean Carter rhymes about financial freedom, buying art, purchasing a building in Dumbo, and Jewish people owning all the property in America. This leads us to immigration. So, from what I've gathered, Dr. Anderson isn't the biggest fan of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or the Civil Rights Movement. He recognizes that this time period in America brought about positivity for black folks and everybody else in America. However, gaining access to white society didn't and doesn't guarantee equality or, I'll add, equity. And legislation like the Immigration Act of 1965, which was driven by the efforts of black leaders, led to a preferential acceptance program for non-immigrant aliens, such as the H-1B visa for workers in specialty occupations or as fashion models of distinguished merit and ability. After hundreds of years of this country preventing African peasants from getting land and paid labor while denying access to rights, respect, and resources, America came up with a quota system that only permits those from other countries with special skills along with their family members. Asian success is due in part to all of this. I've talked about this before too. I'm aware of the fact that I've paraphrased Dr. Claud Anderson to no end so far. So when I tell you that, again, he stresses community among black people and hopes a dollar can remain with us, bouncing 8 times before it leaves us like, say, the Jewish community, I guess. Know that I'm not saying he thinks we can buy from black businesses our way out of our struggle. I mean, as much as I wanted to give my money to a black orthodontist when I got these braces, I couldn't find one in my local area. F you, Delta Dental. Claud Anderson recognizes the legit historical intentional reasons which play a part as to why there aren't a lot of thriving businesses and flourishing black communities. A major difference between him and Thomas Sowell. And I have to say though, according to Claud Anderson, black people should learn from immigrants and practice group economics. It is impossible to be a competitive group of people without a physical community or a broad sense of community, he said. Within months, immigrants will start building communities. There will be a Japantown and Mexican town. And another thing about immigration, at some point, Dr. Anderson has said the mandates of the 13th and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution have been ignored, violated, and corrupted. But there's no explicit mention of black people in this living, breathing document that refers to natives as merciless savages. Looking at the spirit of the law, not the letter of it, Dr. Anderson said, these constitutional amendments were the collective base for the 1866 civil rights laws designed to correct the 1857 Dred Scott decision that held a black man had no rights a white man was bound to respect. These laws were originally intended not for all people, but to specifically correct the systemic injustice imposed upon black people. But who does Dr. Anderson consider black people?
Now, I wrote the first affirmative action plan in 1970 for the state of Florida. When I was over education for the state, I did not write it for minorities. I didn't write it for gays and humpbacks and lesbians and midgets. I wrote it for black folk.
A few seconds before this, Dr. Claud Anderson mentioned black Americans having no substantive leadership and said the dominant white society fabricated groups and called them classes, including gays, humpbacks, lesbians, and midgets. And I'm going to assume that he knows you can be all those things and black, right? Even with that, black isn't a class either. Anyone who knows his works better than me, can you please let me know, would he consider someone who identifies as, say, a black liberal or a conservative black to be black? I'm sure you've noticed I haven't said a whole lot about politics by way of partisanship. Dr. Anderson isn't interested in that, or discrimination for that matter. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the book Powernomics, the National Plan to Empower Black America. He talks about what he describes as true racism, one group holding power over another group and then using what's been gained to further exploit that group. And as much as Claud Anderson talks about black unemployment and jobs, he'll tell you that a 9-to-5 isn't going to make you rich. It takes money to make money. Capital, policies made white America wealthy, that in stolen labor and inheritance. But with his claims about integration and immigration, Dr. Anderson doesn't want anyone or any group to hate anyone or any group. However, the Sambo/Uncle Toms who betray black advancement and opportunity, what?
You'll always have exceptional blacks for a number of reasons. First of all, you'll have some exceptional blacks simply because they defy and beat mathematical probabilities, point one. Point two, you will have some blacks who will survive and do extremely well simply because whites want to be able to demonstrate that the society is not totally shut out against black folk, locked up against black folk. And thirdly, you will find there'll be some exceptional blacks who have been picked or chosen by some of the white power structures, say, this is my black, this is a special black. Now, in history, we had a special name for those individuals that I talked about in the book.
Could feel the same way about what Powernomics calls the blacker-than-thou militants. Dr. Claud Anderson maintains that we should remove voting power from the Democratic Party and give our votes to the highest bidder. Not necessarily to the Republican Party, and I'm with that. We shouldn't blindly vote blue, but we don't always see ourselves as we see the Thomas Sowells of the world. They're not going to go for that. Dr. Claud Anderson has written letters to both Donald Trump and former President Barack Obama for the sake of solutions for Black America. Doubt either responded the way he wanted, and I wish I could show you how, when, and where his strategies are making the lives of Black people better on a macro level, but I haven't seen Powernomics in action. I question why this is, and does it actually work for him or anyone else? I also wonder if the right and conservatives are even aware of who he is or only view him as a black supremacist extremist or something. Like leftists and progressives see Thomas Sowell as a contrarian whose job it is to tell European Americans what they want to hear and absolve them from any responsibility. They can't say that Claude doesn't want us to be held accountable. 99% of all blacks right now who play leadership roles at a state level, city level, and federal level don't know what they're talking about and don't really care. And they have no feelings or sentiments about black people. I have the sentiments and I've done it all my life. And as I've said, I've never had any support from the black overclass that got all that money that are now in recreation and entertainment. They don't do that, Anderson continued. They keep their money for themselves to what we call conspicuous consumptions, making themselves look good or being fashionable. That's for Ye, Ice Cube, Charlemagne, and Jay-Z. Now, if only Sowell and Anderson can debate, and hey, please forgive me with contending with Dr. Anderson's interviews and public speaking more so than his books. But what someone says live could be more indicative of how they really feel. I mean, this complaining that I do on this channel is 99% scripted. I can't say how much of what Dr. Anderson has said that I trust in or believe so far, but I'm still looking into it. And I can understand why a number of people have told me about him. However, there's a W.E.B. Du Bois talented 10th type feel about him. And if this Kanye West style slavery was a choice quote is really from him, then I'm out on him. As far as I'm concerned, Dr. Claud Anderson is the anti-Thomas Sowell because European Americans aren't recommending him. They have no idea of who he is. He doesn't speak for them. I barely knew who he was just last year. If there's anything I've learned, it's that you can listen to and follow all, most, half, some, or none of what he says. Same thing goes for Thomas Sowell. And this includes me too. Because as always, we gonna be all right.
Those what we call some ultra-conservative blacks who see things strictly through the eyes of white folk, and they've learned how to subordinate themselves and to try their best to protect and maintain the status quo, and for that they're rewarded by the white society.